39 bodies, a gay cult leader, and a UFO. In the second half of the 20th century, cults were appearing as part of the spiritual movement away from mainstream belief systems. The Manson family, Jonestown, the Branch Davidians, and the Waco standoff. But none were quite like Heaven's Gate. Marshall Applewhite was born in 1931 and lived until 1997. He was one of 4 children born to a Presbyterian minister and eventually attended college, majoring in philosophy. In 1954, he was drafted into the U.S. Army, where he served for 2 years before receiving an honorable discharge. Applewhite was known as a talented singer and gifted public speaker. He even pursued a career in opera, which brought him to New York City. But after failing to find success as a performer, he turned to teaching. By the 1960s, he had moved into higher education and became an assistant professor at the University of Alabama, where he was later fired for having a sexual relationship with a male student. There are also unverified claims that his earlier discharge from the Army was related to another homosexual relationship. However, no credible evidence has ever confirmed that story. He then went to be a professor at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, where he was fired in 1970, also for having a sexual relationship with a male student. Through all of these years, his relationship with his wife slowly deteriorated. She was aware of multiple other homosexual relationships, and eventually the couple separated. The following year, after being fired from St. Thomas, he checked himself into a psych ward and asked to be cured of his homosexuality, because up until 1973, homosexuality was seen as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. At this point in his life, he was reported as being lost and having a personal and psychological crisis. He had lost his relationship with his wife and kids, along with his career, all due to his sexuality. Then in 1972, everything changed. That was when he met Bonnie Nettles. Exactly how the two met is unclear. Applewhite later claimed he met Bonnie while visiting a friend in the hospital where she worked as a nurse. His sister, however, recalled a different story, saying Applewhite himself had been hospitalized after a near-death experience, and that Bonnie was one of the nurses who cared for him. Either way, Bonnie was known to be esoteric. She was into theology, religion, and seances. She wrote an astrology blog where she claimed to channel Brother Francis, a 19th century friar. She was also involved in the local Theosophical Society group, where she did weekly seances. When she met Marshall, her marriage was also falling apart. They developed a close friendship, which eventually became a relationship. Now this comes despite the fact that Marshall had written about how he and Bonnie had no physical attraction to each other, and Bonnie's niece confirmed that it was known to be platonic and non-romantic, more like a friendship. But Applewhite still said it felt like they had met in a past life, and Bonnie said their meeting had been foretold to her by extraterrestrials. Within 3 months, they had solidified their belief system. They believed that they were the 2 witnesses described in the Book of Revelation, and would tour churches preaching their message. They said they were chosen to fulfill biblical prophecies, and had been given higher level minds than other people. Along the way, they adopted several names, including Bo and Peep and the UFO 2, before eventually settling on the names Doe and T, and began recruiting. They got their first follower, Sharon Morgan, within their first year. She abandoned her family to join Doe and T and gave them permission to use her credit cards. But within 1 month, she left and returned back to her family. Doe then began to get into some legal trouble, being arrested and charged with fraud for using Morgan's cards, but the charges were eventually dropped. But that didn't stop him from getting jail time, where he spent 6 months after stealing a rental car and keeping it for 9 months. Despite the setbacks, they continued recruiting and at one meeting convinced 25 people to join. They began to travel across the country, mainly sleeping in tents and sleeping bags, and during another meeting in Oregon, convinced another 20 people, which caused a bit of a panic in the community because those 20 people disappeared almost overnight and cut off contact with their families, without any explanation. This led to Doe and T being scrutinized, and they began to have other members do the recruiting while they laid low. At their peak, they had around 200 followers. Heaven's Gate wasn't initially known as a cult, but a UFO religion. It was a unique blend of Christianity, New Age spirituality, and UFOlogy. The central belief was that its followers could transform themselves into immortal extraterrestrial beings by rejecting their human nature, and then ascend to the next level of human evolution, what they referred to as the next level. They wouldn't say that they lived in a human body, but rather a vehicle for the soul. Interestingly, decades later, Bob Lazar would claim the US government had told him basically the same thing, that the human body is merely a container for the soul.
That was one of the weirder things about some of the documents that you had at least been alerted to when you were on the base, and one of them being that humans are containers.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Whether that's true is another story entirely, but it's an interesting parallel. Heaven's Gate subscribed to a lot of ideas from the Ancient Astronaut Theory, made popular by Eric von Daniken with Chariots of the Gods, and the History Channel show Ancient Aliens. They stated that aliens seeded humanity millions of years ago, and a recycle of human civilization was looming. Doe and T believed the Bible was a historical book about extraterrestrial contact, and that Jesus was a human embodiment of an entity from the next level, and the entity that entered Jesus had now entered Doe. They believed that to get to the next level, a human had to end all attachments to this planet, which is the same idea that Buddhist monks follow, that you have to break all worldly connections to be able to ascend to the next plane in the afterlife. Recruitment eventually stopped as Doe and T shifted their focus to those who were fully committed, and everyone had to pledge to uniformity. They had to give up family, friends, jobs, money, and possessions. No more sex, no more drugs, no more gender, and no more being your own person. Everyone dressed alike, ate the same meals, had the same haircuts, and lived by the same rigid routine. And of the 19 male members, 8 of them were so devout that they underwent castration to prove themselves. The first procedure was performed by one of the members that was a nurse, but it led to the man almost dying, so all future ones were done in hospitals. Doe explained the next level as not being another planet, dimension, or heaven, but that most people would understand it as heaven explained in the Bible. It was simply the next step of human evolution with no worldly desires. They believed that God was just a highly advanced ET. Now fast forward to the 1980s, and T had been diagnosed with a type of skin cancer known as melanoma. It spread, eventually leading to one of her eyes being removed, and ultimately took her life in 1985. Now this obviously was a big hit for Heaven's Gate, not only because they lost one of their founders, but because this seemed to disprove some of their beliefs. Up until T's death, Doe and T taught that the group would physically leave the Earth on board a UFO, but now this couldn't be true since she died. Doe saved the belief system by tweaking it, and now teaching that her vehicle had simply been discarded, but her consciousness had graduated and reached the next level, and that they just needed the sign for when they could do it too, which was the Comet Hale-Bopp. Now before we discuss why it was important to the cult, it's crucial we discuss what it was to the entire world. It was first discovered in 1995 and was popular in society because it was a one-in-a-century celestial phenomenon. It was brighter than all other stars in the sky and known as the Great Comet of 1997. Hale-Bopp was discovered 7.2 AUs from the Sun, much further than when any normal comet would be discovered, which signified that it was likely unusually large. And it was. It was estimated to be 60 kilometers across. For reference, Halley's Comet is only 15, 1/4 of the size. It also had 2 tails, one bright white dust tail and another blue ion gas tail. It was also visible for 18 months, giving time for everyone around the planet to have a chance to see it. Then in 1996, amateur astronomer Chuck Schromker photographed the comet, and his astronomy software noticed a mysterious object following. He called into Coast to Coast AM, a known conspiracy show hosted by Art Bell, which Bob Lazar was also once on. The story then became that the mysterious object was a spacecraft. This was the sign for Heaven's Gate. Even on their website, they mention Hale-Bopp having a companion, and how it's irrelevant if that's true or not, because professional astronomers quickly identified the following object to simply be a background star, and that Schromek's astronomy software was configured incorrectly, leading to a misidentification. But by that point, it didn't matter. They had already decided that this was their sign. The group's website even had an explanation of why they didn't think what they were about to do was suicide. Because the true meaning of suicide is to turn against the next level when it is being offered. And this comet was that offer. By late 1996, they had rented a mansion paying $7,000 in rent and purchased alien abduction insurance covering any abduction, impregnation, or death caused by aliens, and would pay $1 million per person. Within a few months, one of the most infamous UFO sightings ever, with over 10,000 witnesses, occurred on March 13, 1997, the Phoenix Lights. Within 1 week, Doe had taped a video of himself titled Doe's Final Exit, continuing to claim that Hale-Bopp was the sign they had been waiting for, and how they would have to commit mass suicide so that they could be transported to the next level in the UFO. The members also recorded what they called their exit statements, calmly explaining why they joined, how it provided all the answers that they had been looking for, how this was all by their own choice, and how happy they were.
How do you feel about what is ahead for us?
Oh, this is the happiest day of my life. I mean, I've been looking for this for so long.
And just before the mass suicides, the website was updated with the message, Hale-Bopp brings closure to Heaven's Gate. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. On March 22nd and 23rd, the suicides were successful. Everyone took lethal doses of phenobarbital, mixed in applesauce, pudding, and with vodka to ensure it would work. They then placed plastic bags around their heads to induce asphyxiation. Everyone was dressed exactly the same: black shirts, black sweatpants, brand new black and white Nike Decade sneakers, and an armband reading Heaven's Gate Away Team. And everyone had one $5 bill and 3 quarters in their pocket. An inside joke that they had left the planet permanently, but would have money to use a payphone to call back home. Everyone had a purple sheet placed over them by the other members who had not yet committed. The uniforms represented their unity. The Nikes were because Doe liked Nike's Just Do It slogan, but would have members pronounce it as Just Do It. Other reports mentioned that they got those exact shoes simply because they were on sale, and the shoes were discontinued quickly after this event. The San Diego Sheriff's Office found the bodies after an anonymous tip from a former member a few days later, and it became national news. This news coverage led to the suicide of a 58-year-old man with no known connection to Heaven's Gate, and within the following months, 3 former members were successful as well. In the years after, Due to his reputation, the house was eventually torn down and a new home built in its place. Today, the website is still maintained and active. They still reply to emails. Matter of fact, they replied to me within 1 hour. Whoever is running it mentioned that it is their given task to ensure the information remains available for when the UFO returns. They even have a YouTube channel where you can watch hours of Doe's lessons, along with his and the members' final exit statements. Now, a lot of people dismiss Heaven's Gate as simply 39 crazy people who believed mass suicide would help a UFO take them to a better place. But you should recognize it as the truly complex situation that it was. By their final year in 1997, members had spent 2 decades reshaping every aspect of their identities around the cult's worldview. They had cut ties with family, given up careers, possessions, individuality, suppressed sexuality, and come to see their bodies as temporary vehicles, all in search of answers that mainstream religion couldn't give, and to the mystery that we all call life.